bring back the wolf. Well, this is fantastic because I love wolves. And the gray wolf is a species that has been decimated and has been vilified and has been made, there's lots of disinformation about the wolf, the big bad wolf, Little Red Riding Hood. And now I was part of a team that met in 2016 and said, we're gonna have to have a campaign to force the wolf to be repatriated back into Colorado. We need a voter mandate to do that. And that was led by Mike Phillips, the man who introduced the wolf to Yellowstone and then was hired by Ted Turner to run the Turner Endangered Species Fund. And so Ted Turner put in $1 million and we raised another $5 and we got that vote onto the ballot and we won at the ballot box in 2020. And now in 2023, we are now about to have our first wolves come back into the woods of Colorado in December of this year. And we're going to hear the cry of the wolf in the Elk Mountains where I live up near Aspen, and that is just such a tremendous thing. But it's in the face of great odds, and so I'm so glad that we have a really tremendous panel coming onto the stage, led by Dee Malone. So if you could come up here and take your seats, Dee, please, and Dallas and Tammy and Michelle Lute, yeah, thank you. So please join us on the stage, and Dee, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and you can, away you go.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you for asking us to be here.
Please.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being present. I'm Delia Malone. I'm a volunteer, wildlife chair for Colorado Sierra Club, and I'm an ecologist by profession. Have worked several decades over all of Colorado, conducting surveys for rare plants and rare animals, rare communities, with the goal of preserving those for all time. In 2016, an extraordinary convergence of NGOs culminated in the election of gray wolves back to Colorado. We submitted petitions to place a wolf reintroduction initiative on the ballot, and voters passed the measure in the 2020 election. Never have we seen citizens rise up to demand justice for a non-human member of our community of life. After many twists and turns, Colorado Parks and Wildlife developed a wolf restoration and management plan. Wolf release in western Colorado is scheduled to start by December 31st of 2023, as required by law. Wolf release in western Colorado, however, is built on a plan that speaks to management. From an indigenous perspective, we don't manage our relatives. Instead, what is needed is a relationship plan. But why are we discussing gray wolf reintroduction at AREI-AREDAY with a theme of climate, democracy, and human security? Our panelists will take a deep dive into concepts foundational to the answer to that question, one of which is balance, both ecological, cultural, and spiritual balance. Western science and traditional ecological knowledge acknowledge and even embrace the role of gray wolves as a balancer. Unfortunately, although wolves won the election, the narrative appears to remain the same. CPW's final management plan is eerily similar to that of the Northern Rockies, where states have passed laws evocative of the Old West, aiming to cull remaining wolf populations by 85 to 90%. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently issued their 10J rule for, quote, flexible wolf management in Colorado, which merely continues the narrative. Changing the narrative and changing our relationship with the natural world is essential if we are to be different from wolf management in the Northern Rockies. As stated by John Vucetich, head of the longest ever running natural wolf-moose experiment, which is located at Isle Royale in his book, Restoring the Balance, the health of ecosystems inhabited by large herbivores depends on the cascading effects of predation. And when asked, what are carnivores good for? He responded, they're good for humans. And I'll add, healthy ecosystems are resilient ecosystems, resilient to perturbations such as climate warming. From an indigenous cultural perspective, quoting Crystal Lightning, who is an indigenous actress and member of the Enoch Cree Nation, what is happening to the wolf is a social justice issue for tribes. The federal government is still adhering to theories on land management and wildlife management that were established by white supremacists and eugenicists in the early 1900s, exemplified by Madison Grant. We need to ask why. The Wolf Treaty, conceived by the Global Indigenous Council, provides the path to restoring our relationship with the wolf. The balance, the honor, recognition, and to revitalize the ancient relationship that we have with the wolf. To welcome the wolf to once again live beside us as Creator intended, and to restore balance to Mother Earth, where we are the stewards and the wolf is the protector of our lands. Often, the simplest and most impactful way to undo harms humans have wrought on the natural world is to let native species perform their natural ecosystem services. That was said by my friend Bethany Cotton, environmental attorney and conservation director for Cascadia Wildlands. So, let's dive in with our first panelist. I want to welcome just a great person and great Colorado State Representative, Tammy Story of House District 25 in West and Southwest Jefferson counties. She serves as the chair of the Capital Development Committee and sits on the Agriculture, Water, and Natural Resources Committee, as well as the Public and Behavioral Health and Human Services Committee, where she has been a strong, unswerving advocate for environmental policy, working to safeguard Colorado's landscape and wildlife, ensuring their preservation for generations to come. Tammy, thank you so much. Please come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and sit with this very powerful panel and moderator who are experts in their field. I'm not a biologist, I'm not an ecologist, I'm not a wildlife scientist. However, I am a legislator, and I am so honored to be here. My name is Tammy Story, and I'm a state representative of Colorado, House District 25. I serve the people in the foothills of Jeffco, south of I-70, and also southwest unincorporated Littleton. I am a passionate advocate for public education, an environmentalist, and a wildlife conservationist. I have some great slides to share with you of gray wolves at the Colorado Wolf and Wildlife Center near Woodland Park, Colorado. And then some slides during the 10th session that we had just this past January to May, surrounding a bill that was threatening the reintroduction of wolves and concluding with some more great gray wolf photos. So, as many of you likely know, gray wolves are native to North America. And during the 1940s, they were poisoned, trapped, and hunted to near extinction. And this was all due to a perceived threat to ranchers. In 2020, as has been mentioned, Proposition 114 came before the voters in Colorado as a citizen initiative that was carried, the signature gathering piece by Rocky Mountain Wolf Action Fund, but scores and scores of volunteers and other interests who invested financial resources to help make this happen. Many of them, I'm sure, are here today. And they collected all the necessary signatures. And unbelievably, it actually passed, which was awesome. 13 counties across the state of Colorado had a majority vote in support of the wolves. But more importantly, across the state of Colorado, there was a majority of voices that supported the reintroduction of wolves here in Colorado. So Proposition 114 directed the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission to develop a gray wolf introduction plan. Several elements were to be met. Among them was to reintroduce, and in the plan, manage gray wolves by December 31st of 2023. They were to hold hearings across the state with scientific, economic, and social considerations. Periodically, they are to update the plan and use state funds to compensate livestock owners for losses due to gray wolf depredation and help them adapt to use of conflict avoidance measures. It's not a perfect plan, and there are a lot of flaws, and many folks here will talk about those as well. Along the way, in order to carry out the adoption of Proposition 114, the Department of Natural Resources invested $1 million with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to undertake a National Environmental Policy Act process, NEPA, to develop a 10J rule which will give livestock producers the flexibility in wolf management that they requested. It was part of the bargaining in order to get this bill across and the proposition in place. The process to acquire the 10J rule was and is on track to be completed by December 15th, 2023, thus honoring the will of the voters and the request by livestock producers to have a 10J rule in place. Policy is messy sometimes. The process, the Senate Bill 23-256 was introduced this past session. It passed through the Senate and then moved on to the House. It's the chamber that I work in. Senate Bill 23-256 insisted on the issuance of a final experimental population designation per Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act before wolves are released to in Colorado, upending the current NEPA process between the state and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to acquire the 10J, thus delaying gray wolf reintroduction. I was wholly opposed to this bill, and I worked actively against it. This bill, as I mentioned, would upend the current 10J process by compromising the sufficiency of the environmental impact statement upon which the final rule would be based. And the NEPA process would have to start all over, and Colorado would have lost $1 million it invested in the NEPA process. There was intention by the bill proponents that the reintroduction could be delayed until an administration much more favorable to livestock owners only could then be seated. I offered amendments to shore up Senate Bill 23-256 and minimize the damage that it could do to the NEPA process, then underway to acquire the 10J rule that DNR, Department of Natural Resources, was seeking to ensure gray wolves are reintroduced in Colorado by the end of December 2023 and simultaneously satisfy the will of the voters. I brought forward a number of amendments in committee and on the floor during the second reading. None of my introduced amendments were adopted, though half of the Democrats voting on third reading voted against the bill, 22 of 44 Democrats. It wasn't enough, as you might recognize, to kill the bill in the House, but having 22 Democrats vote against a Democrat who was carrying the bill in the House, along with a Republican partner as co-primes, and we had bipartisan partners, co-primes in the Senate as well, 22 of 44 was pretty good. And it's pretty unusual for a Democrat to stand at the well and speak out against another Democrat's bill. Despite our best efforts, 23-256 passed out of the House on May 3rd, 5 days before the end of the session, and headed to the governor's desk. Session ended Monday, May 8th, still awaiting the governor's action. We waited anxiously for days, over a week. On Tuesday, May 16th, just over a week after session ended, the governor vetoed the bill that would have upended the current process that was underway to reintroduce gray wolves by the end of this year. A veto. That's what we were waiting for, and it happened. We are still on our way to having paws on the ground by the end of December 23. However, there is more to do. We must enact legislation to protect gray wolves once they are introduced to include coexistence strategies. Flattery, range riders, removal of carcasses, guardian dogs. There's a lot of different strategies we can employ. I'm working on drafting policy with the support and expertise from my very passionate wolf advocate friend and shero, Rhonda Dern, who's here in the audience today, and the professional ecologist conservationist shero, Delia Malone, and many others. There are so many conversations going on, and I've met some people today, and I know there are others behind the scenes. But as an apex species, we need gray wolves to exist and thrive across North America and bring them back to Colorado. Yellowstone's wolves have proven their presence benefits the ecology, the wildlife ecosystem, and our human experience. Gray wolves will do the same in Colorado, and it is our duty to ensure that they thrive. And I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Representative Story. Perfect. Next we have up Dr. Michelle Lute. Michelle is the co-executive director for Wildlife for All and board member of the Rewilding Institute. Both operations to work to protect the wild world, promote coexistence, and democratize decision-making about wild lives and wild places. Dr. Lute is a conservation scientist and advocate with nearly 20 years experience in biodiversity conservation on public and private lands around the globe. She dedicates her professional life to promoting human-wildlife coexistence through effective public engagement, equitable participatory processes, and evidence-based decision-making. Please welcome Dr. Michelle Lute.
Thank you all for being here today and sticking with it on the last day. I want to talk to you a little bit about some things I've learned on my journey of promoting human-wolf coexistence. I was traditionally trained in animal behavior and ecology, and then did a PhD in human-wolf coexistence, how to move from conflict to coexistence. And if you talk to any wolf biologist, you're going to hear the same story, that I learned it was about addressing human-human conflict over how we make decisions about wolves. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to offer a couple maybe slightly provocative ideas, but just hear me out. So for humans, across cultures, across politics, we have 5, maybe 7 moral foundations that drive a lot of how we determine what is right or wrong. Liberals emphasize 2, fairness and care. No big surprises there. Those are pretty universal. Where things get interesting is with folks on the right side of the political spectrum. Folks subscribing to traditional Republican or right-leaning politics actually balance more moral foundations than left-leaning folks. So they care about care, or reducing harm, and they care about fairness. But they also care about unity within their group or family. They care about purity. And this all translates to them being very good at defending their own, at cooperation that liberals can only dream of. They let nothing get in the way of defending what's theirs. Now consider the Colorado wolf vote, the ballot initiative that's been referenced a couple times already. What many celebrate as direct democracy and closing the gap between policy and the wolf recovery that the vast majority of Americans want to see. But the vote was close. In percentages that basically match the split between Americans who believe the last presidential election was fair and those that believe it was rigged. So according to a January 2022 poll, quote, only 55% of Americans believe that President Biden legitimately won the 2020 election, despite no evidence of widespread voter fraud. So we have to ask, how did we get here? It was a Republican president in the 70s that signed the Endangered Species Act, after all. So much has changed because we've forgotten how to cooperate with a common purpose like wolves do. We've moved figuratively and literally into entrenched camps. It's been said that all politics are identity politics. We're just more aware of it now, perhaps. Studies now are detailing how the left and right self-organize into neighborhoods, types of housing that signal the identity and with how we decorate our homes, the signs in the yard, the flags that we fly, the t-shirts that we wear, and bumper stickers that we affix to our cars. Even the TV shows we watch, where we shop, what we eat, are all influenced by our political affiliations and often unconsciously chosen to signal our identity. All of this means we cut ourselves off from interactions with those that see differently from us. Our coffee shops, schools, offices are safely frequented by like minds and social interactions that reinforce our preconceived notions of the world. This is what scientists call belief polarization, whereby those like-minded blinders lead to more extreme attitudes and beliefs. This also means that we're susceptible to what's called the black sheep effect, which is the tendency for individuals to more harshly judge group members that aren't towing the party line or deviating from the norm in some way. In other words, it gets in the way of us even cooperating within our group of mostly like minds. Paul Watson's story today illustrates this really well. So, we're talking about wolves, right? What can we learn from wolves? There's a few key pieces of a wolf's journey that provides a roadmap. First, wolves are willing to travel vast distances to get to their destination. If they want to start a family of their own, they have to leave their natal pack where they were born, find a partner, and eke out a new territory. Sometimes they have to travel far and wide for that mate and a place of their own. One young female wolf in Scandinavia set the record for dispersing more than 10,000 kilometers in a single year. We have to be willing to go vast distances to meet our objectives. We are currently not where we need to be. We're far from it. The US over the past few years has fallen in global ranks for several important metrics, including those that measure democracy. We're now considered a flawed democracy, yet we still operate like we're living in a working one. So first and foremost, democracy is our destination. In a sense, to save wolves, we have to save our institutions. We have to address gerrymandering, which can make politicians immune to the will of the people. We have to protect voting rights so that people can make their voice heard. We must also reform state governance to be more democratic and inclusive of the many voices that speak for wildlife alive. That's why I joined one of the most important movements, in my opinion, to arise in the last few years, the organization that I work for now, Wildlife for All. Our collective work with lots of groups, lots of state-based groups across the country, to reform wildlife governance will be foundational to all wildlife conservation work in the years to come. We're taking the great example that Colorado has set in many ways by diversifying its commission to be more representative of the people, and we're trying to apply that in other states. We're modernizing state wildlife agencies to have the authority and funding to conserve non-game species, those that are not hunted. And so much more of the systemic work required to make sure that when wolves are not listed as endangered, because that inevitably happens at some point, that they'll still be conserved by the states. Back to wolves. The second lesson we can learn from them is one of radical cooperation that is strategic and protects all life. Once we get to our democratic destination, we'll have to cooperate with our fellow citizens, even those that weren't with us from the very beginning. We have to address the polarity created by our own participation in geographic polarization that I spoke about earlier, and no black sheep, whether they're in your family or your political party. I say this knowing how difficult it will be, but we need to consider diverse viewpoints. Sometimes wolves shack up with coyotes after all. So for life to thrive, sometimes we have to make strange bedfellows. The third lesson from wolves: they are resilient and persistent. Pup mortality in a given year can be upwards of 50%, but they do not go gently into that good night. We're coming off some tough losses ourselves. Wherever you lay on the political spectrum, you're probably impacted by COVID, by soaring housing costs, inflation. You're probably unhappy with some Supreme Court decision. We have to defy those losses and keep going until our mixed communities of humans, more than humans, and all wild nature are thriving again. Wolves fiercely defend even the most vulnerable pups for as long as possible. So most importantly, we must protect all vulnerable others from the powerful until we can have a thriving family, broadly defined. The last lesson wolves give us is to know thy enemy and fight like hell. We might want to focus on the opposing political party as the enemy, but the underlying enemy is anything that threatens our broadly defined family, our lives, our way of life. Just like the rural folks and ranchers that confuse wolves as the enemy when it's really climate change, global economic instability, and evolving values regarding animal well-being, we too sometimes confuse our enemies. Our real enemy is capitalism, and it's the status quo power that will sell life to the highest bidder. The real enemy is division, and to fight like hell, we must fight bravely for unity. So what's my theory of change? Well, as I've basically outlined, my theory of change is wolves. How does this translate to a roadmap for wolf recovery in Colorado? Once wolves have paws on the ground, we need robust protections, and it's up to the state, because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service designated wolves as experimental non-essential populations, which is a specific category under the Endangered Species Act that basically makes it easier to kill wolves. You'll hear people talk about management flexibility, but really it's about making it easier to kill wolves. There is some hope that Colorado wolf recovery could be helped at the federal level if the Fish and Wildlife Service drafted a national wolf recovery plan with a holistic approach that's mandated by the Endangered Species Act. A coordinated national plan is essential because most states are failing at conserving their wolves. And Colorado's wolves will not exist in a vacuum. Genetic exchange needs to connect wolves to the north and south, and maybe someday also to the east and west. Finally, we need governance reform so the policies that decide the fate of wolves represent the best interests of wolves, wild nature, and all people that care about wildlife. Along the way, we need to work with all Coloradans so that indigenous sovereignty is respected and local communities can thrive with sustainable livelihoods and economies. For this to work, we will have to find creative ways to work with everyone. This is an ambitious roadmap, I realize, but it's required by the crises that we have created. We still have a chance to be heroes, to fully become what we love, to become like wolves and fight fiercely for our family, a broadly defined family of life that includes the most vulnerable, the diverse life that wolves beget. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for some really provocative perspectives. Finally, we have the great honor to have J. Dallas Gudgel with us. Dallas has nearly 4 decades of experience in environmental science, lobbying, human rights advocacy, social and environmental justice, individual and organizational consulting, professional development consulting, diversity, equity, and inclusion, public relations, and probably most significant, he began as a backcountry backpacker when he was 13 years old. Come on up, Dallas. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm gonna do it from right here. We got like 3.5 minutes. And so all of this is very important. And, I'll try to maybe cut back my comments a little bit. Amachiape. My name is Dallas. Good day. And Chantewashte, Teoshpe, Chantewashte. So this is a good heart family here that I'm looking at. And, we're talking a lot about people, and when we're wanting to talk about wolves, and I think there's a lot of things that we have in common. And there's a lot of ways we can learn from our four-legged relatives, our relatives with roots and fins and whatnot. So, Chantewashte, that means a good heart. So no matter what you might hear me say today, know that I'm coming from a place of a good heart. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of this human interaction before I talk about wolves. And it all relates. So in my Dakota language, we do not have a word for love. What we say is tashihila. Tashihila means I will suffer for you. So this weekend with my very broad Teoshpe, that's a family, that's a chosen family. I have to move in white space. It says white space. It's not a comfortable space. It doesn't work for many of us. This weekend, I've had to deal, I've spent a lot of my emotional capital on patriarchal white saviorism, on performative virtue signaling, on tokenism. And my neoliberal friends out there, please hear me, because it could be argued that the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis. We have removed ourselves from our mother, and any child who turns on their mother is hugely conflicted. My friend of mine, John Trudell, used to say that a lot. So we are conflicted because we've turned on our mother. And so I have been working in the environmental movement as an indigenous person for 40 years. You can imagine what that might have been like 40 years ago. I thought we'd made some progress. I'm not seeing it. I also worked for uranium miners' compensation in the Four Corners area, not far, and Colorado's part of that. So all that to say that, well-meaning, well-intended, we really have to do our own internal work. The thing we have in common is we're humans. And we may have many of the same goals, certainly. Wolf-free introduction, the curbing of climate warming, biodiversity, preservation of biodiversity. And so we may have some of those same goals. I guess what I'm hoping to get across here is, as humans, part of the human experience is we're all horribly flawed. And being spacious, from that place of understanding our flaws, this is an internal, doing our internal work, doing our internal healing, doing our, whatever it is, doing that trauma integration, whatever it is that we have to do to be spacious enough to accept one another is what we're really doing and what this work is really about. And I'd like to not feel like an outsider. I'd like to feel like an insider, because you need me. You need indigenous wisdom. We need indigenous wisdom if we're going to get through this process. So all that, the good news is that Magaina, Mother Earth, still loves us. The bad news is I don't know, and none of you know, how long she will suffer for us. So I came here to talk about wolves, and we have to think outside of the box. And when we're talking about wolves, we've already heard, some things that we could learn from them. Traditional ecological knowledge is a science of observation. Postmodern science is a science of experimentation, poking and prodding, and what you get is a result, and you get a result from the environment that you set up in the lab or wherever it happens to be. So if you're using a traditional ecological knowledge, you're using that science of observation. And we've observed apex predators. We've observed for thousands of years ungulates, and we understand how this all works. Western science is just now catching up to traditional science, and I don't want to be the I told you so, but we've kind of been talking to a lot of folks about, yes, the trees talk to one another. We've known that for a long time. So we see all these studies coming out, right? Oh, the trees talk to one another, duh. And we've had a lot of really great presentations. No, I don't want to say that this, this has been, it's just hard for someone in my culture to move within white space, even though I've been doing it on the Capitol Hill and in Capitol buildings across the West for 40 years. What I'm saying is, we just have to be more thoughtful with how we organize groups like this, and learning from the wolves. And we have to think outside the box. So here's what I'm here for. I do work with ungulates. I'm trying to help a number of 29 treaty tribes work with ungulates. We're supposed to be talking about wolves. But free-roaming bison are super important. And free-roaming bison could solve a lot of climate crisis problems. If I'm working with other groups in Kenya and Honduras and Cambodia, Colombia, Mexico, restoring arid grasslands so that the grass is this tall again is a really good carbon sink. Because once you get arid grassland restoration using ungulates, then when the grass burns, and it's supposed to, where does the carbon go? It stays in the soil. When the trees burn, where does the carbon go? Back into the atmosphere. So there's a lot of science out there too, both traditional and both modern, and we need to put both of those together. So why am I talking about ungulates? Well, ungulates need apex predators. So that's the cycle that we're looking at. So in working with bison, I am also trying to think about ways to get our Aboriginal food source back, the bison, and to get food sovereignty, to end diabetes on reservations, to have our people become more healthy with our Aboriginal food source. Again, we need apex predators and ungulates roaming free on the prairie, restoring the original ecosystem that we've lost by traditional science. So, and we need to think outside the box. Here's a neat idea. I'm trying to look at, I'm 3 seconds over. I'm trying to look at restoring my Aboriginal food source and getting food sovereignty for the poorest of the poor in a rich country on reservations. I would also like to have food sovereignty for wolves. Now that might sound weird, but yes, food sovereignty for wolves. So we need to bring wolves back. Now we can get it all to science and we can take some questions. We can do all of that. We need metapopulations, we need connectivity, we need subpopulation, blah, 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 blah. We need all of that. But yes, I would like to come from the place that wolves have intrinsic value and they deserve food sovereignty. So, thinking outside the box. That is not a Western settler culture paradigm. We need to redo those paradigms. We need to just twist it upside down. So that's where I come from, is food sovereignty for wolves. Let's start there. I'm an elk hunter. Elk are great. They taste good. So we need that. You know, wolves don't hunt for sport. They hunt for survival. So let's all try to work together and think outside the box and look at our ways in which we can sequester, store, sink, pull down carbon, because bison are amazing engineers, amazing environmental engineers, and wolves are amazing environmental engineers, and that and they will influence, well, read Aldo Leopold. He kind of figured it out. He was one way and then he went the other way, and I think he joined the right side in the end.
That was absolutely perfect, Dallas. Thank you. Can I have a few minutes for a question, or am I like totally out of time? He agreed? I can have one. One question. It's a really simple one, Chip. It'll go really quick. So, to each of you, how do we achieve a vision of coexistence where wolves fulfill their natural role in maintaining resilient and biologically diverse ecosystems? In short, how do we not become like our neighbors in the Northern Rockies?
I'll take it first.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll probably just be very quickly kind of summarizing what I've already said, but, you know, we know how to do non-lethal. We know how to do human-wolf coexistence. In a way, it's easy. I mean, it takes hard work, and it takes funding, and it takes behavior change and learning new practices, but we know how to do that, and the science supports that it works. We can effectively have wolves and livestock and people on the ground, and everybody can be safe with some preventative measures. So I think coexistence, the challenge next is how do we actually work together to get good policy that stands the test of time, the test of lawsuits, and represents, you know, the diverse Coloradans' interests in wolves and the environment. And there's no short answer to that, but that's the challenge for coexistence, is to get people in the room, diverse voices, and democracy is messy, but that's the best system we have right now to make decisions that are going to last. So human-human coexistence is one of the biggest challenges. That's my response.
Is it on? It is on. I thought when I was knocking it around it would make noise. I mean, that's the million-dollar question here, right? We have some policy that's been passed, and we have some policy that has been vetoed recently for Colorado in terms of reintroduction of the wolves. It'd be great to take these three with me and go visit with all the legislators to convince them of why we need coexistence for wolves, and why we need strategies to be employed by livestock producers who literally fear them and wouldn't hesitate to shoot a wolf or several wolves if they had an opportunity or felt like they were threatened, which they will have that opportunity. So I think it's good conversations that need to be had with lots of people to help them understand that's how I got here. Like, I didn't have the background or the education, still don't have the wealth of knowledge that among the people that I'm sitting with in terms of wolves and their existence and why they need to thrive. I have, you know, bits of understanding about it, but I want to work with people that are experts in the field that know more about this than I do to ensure that we can bring forward good policy that will help ensure that we help wolves survive and thrive here in Colorado. It's part of their native territory. I think they deserve an opportunity to be here, and I want it to be a successful adventure.
Yeah. You get the last one. All right, I think probably the two most important things I can think about for Colorado is coexistence and using the resources that are available to Colorado to do this right and differently than the states north of here. So Montana, in Colorado, we have the Wood River Wolf Project, which is a 16-year demonstration project where 20 to 26,000 sheep live every year next to 3 to 5 packs of wolves, and we lose less than, over the 16-year period, on average, less than 5 sheep to wolf depredations in that 16-year demonstration project. We have experts in the field who have reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone in '95, into Idaho in '95 as well. We've had wolf populations when they were being co-managed with the Nez Perce, the Nimiipuu tribe in Idaho, nearly to 2,000. And now the state of Idaho wants to kill all of the wolves down to a management level of about 350 wolves. That is not a viable population. That is looking at extinction, and that is genetically isolating a species. There won't be a metapopulation that can connect to their subpopulations. So use us, use this. We can offer training on non-lethal, so the coexistence piece is the non-lethal piece. We need the wolves in our ecosystem, and we need to learn how to coexist with them. Good chance the first wolves are going to be dumped just west of Chip's house over there on the flat tops, just west of Aspen. So figure out how to coexist with them, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, Colorado. We're here. We can help. We can help you with that. So That's what I would say.
Thank you, everybody. We can do this. We can restore a balance. And thank you, Chip, for letting us go over time.
Yes, well, bring back the wolf, bring back the balance, shall we? Okay.